The morning was calm, the kind of quiet that usually meant an easy start to the day for Officer Reynolds. The sun was just beginning to climb over the trees, spilling soft light across the open highway. The roads were nearly empty, only a few cars passing every now and then. He was sipping his coffee, the radio murmuring low in the background when something unusual caught his eye. Up ahead, an old blue sedan was drifting slightly between lanes. It wasn't speeding, but it wasn't steady either. He frowned, thinking the driver might be tired, maybe someone returning home after a long night shift. He watched for a moment, waiting to see if the car corrected itself, but it didn't. It swerved again, this time crossing the center line before quickly jerking back. He put down his cup and reached for the siren switch. The red and blue lights flashed, cutting through the morning calm. The sedan didn't slow down right away, which made him tense. Most people pulled over as soon as they saw those lights, but this one kept moving, just a little slower now, still not stopping. "Come on, just pull over," he muttered under his breath. After another 100 feet, the car finally eased to the shoulder. He parked behind it, keeping his distance. Years of experience told him that even a simple traffic stop could turn unpredictable. He stepped out of his cruiser, one hand resting near his holster out of habit, and began to walk toward the car. The windows were tinted slightly, but he could make out a shape behind the wheel, smaller than usual. His pace slowed. Something about it didn't look right. The car's engine was still running, and he could see movement inside, small movements like someone fidgeting nervously. He approached the driver's side window and tapped lightly. The window rolled down halfway, and what he saw made him freeze. Sitting behind the wheel wasn't an adult. It was a boy, no older than 12, maybe 13 at most. His hands barely reached the steering wheel, and his face was pale and frightened. Officer Reynolds blinked, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. "Hey there," he said slowly, keeping his voice calm. "Can you tell me what's going on? Where are your parents?" The boy's lips trembled. His eyes darted between the officer and the road ahead like he was thinking about running. Before he could answer, a soft cry came from the back seat. Reynolds leaned slightly to look inside, and his chest tightened. In the back, strapped into an old car seat, was a baby. No more than a year-old, face red and wet with tears, crying uncontrollably. The officer's heart sank. His instincts shifted from caution to concern. He lowered his voice, trying not to scare the boy. "It's okay," he said gently. "I'm not angry. I just need to understand what's happening." "Why are you driving this car?" The boy swallowed hard and tried to speak, but the words came out shaky. I had to," he said. "I didn't have a choice." The officer's mind raced. He scanned the car quickly, no signs of another adult. The front passenger seat was empty, just a worn purse on the floor and a baby bottle rolling around near the gear shift. He could see that the boy's hands were shaking as he gripped the steering wheel. "All right," Reynolds said softly. "Can you turn off the engine for me?" The boy hesitated, then slowly reached forward and did as told. The engine went quiet, leaving only the sound of the baby's sobs. The silence felt heavy. "Good," the officer said. "Now can you step out of the car?" The boy opened the door carefully and stepped out, keeping his eyes on the ground. He was small for his age, wearing an oversized hoodie and sneakers that looked a little too big. There was a deep sadness in his face, the kind that didn't belong on a child. Reynolds knelt slightly so he wasn't towering over him. "What's your name, son?" he asked. The boy didn't answer right away. He wiped at his eyes quickly, trying to act brave. "I'm not supposed to talk to strangers," he whispered. "That's a good rule," the officer said kindly. "But right now I'm here to help you. You're not in trouble. I just need to know if you're okay, and if your baby sister's okay too." The boy's eyes flickered with worry. "She's fine," he said quickly. "She's hungry, though, and tired." "All right," Reynolds said softly. "We'll make sure she's safe. But first I need to know where your mom or dad is. Are they home?" At those words, the boy's expression changed. His lips pressed together and his eyes filled with tears he tried hard not to let fall. He looked away, staring down the empty road. Reynolds felt his stomach twist. Something was very wrong. He put a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "Hey, talk to me. What happened?" The boy didn't speak for a long time. The only sound was the baby crying behind them. Finally, in a voice so soft it was almost lost to the wind, he said, "Mom didn't wake up." The officer froze. "What do you mean?" he asked carefully. The boy's chin trembled as he tried to explain. She was lying in bed this morning and I tried to wake her up, but she didn't move. I called her name and I shook her, but she wouldn't open her eyes. I didn't know what to do. He wiped his nose with his sleeve, his small shoulders trembling. I remembered she told me once that if anything ever happened, I should go to Grandma's house. So, I took the keys. I just wanted to get there. Reynolds felt his throat tighten. The words hit him harder than he expected. He took a slow breath and looked back at the car, at the crying baby who didn't understand any of it. The situation was heartbreaking and terrifying all at once. "You were driving to your grandmother's house?" he asked. The boy nodded quickly. "It's not far. Just 2 towns away." The officer shook his head softly. "That's still a long way, buddy. You could have gotten hurt." "I know," the boy whispered. "But I couldn't leave her. She was crying so much. I didn't know what else to do." Reynolds swallowed hard, trying to keep his voice steady. He had seen a lot of things on this job. Accidents, break-ins, even tragedies. But something about this moment cut deeper. It wasn't just about what happened. It was about what this kid had tried to do. Out of fear, love, and confusion, he'd made a choice that most grown-ups wouldn't have handled half as bravely. "Okay," Reynolds said finally. "Here's what we're going to do. I'm going to make a few calls and we'll get someone to check on your mom right away. We'll also make sure your baby sister gets some food, all right?" The boy looked up at him, eyes wide with both relief and fear. "Are we in trouble?" "No," Reynolds said firmly. "You're not in trouble. You did something very brave, even if it was dangerous. But right now, you don't have to handle this alone anymore." He led the boy toward his patrol car, telling him to sit inside where it was warm. Then he went back to the sedan and carefully unbuckled the baby. She was still crying softly, her cheeks wet. He gently rocked her in his arms while calling dispatch, giving the address the boy had mumbled earlier. As he waited for confirmation, he looked at the 2 siblings, one crying from hunger, the other staring quietly out the window, lost in shock. When the radio finally crackled back, the voice on the other end confirmed what he feared. Paramedics had reached the address. There was no response from the mother. They were taking care of things now. Reynolds closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of the news heavy on his chest. He didn't have the heart to tell the boy yet. Not here, not now. All he could do was make sure the children were safe and cared for. He strapped the baby safely into the seat beside her brother in the patrol car, offering the boy a bottle of water and a granola bar from his glove box. "We'll go see your grandma soon, okay?" he said softly. The boy nodded, staring down at his hands. "Will Mom be okay?" he asked. The officer hesitated. There was no easy way to answer that. "We'll make sure someone's with her," he said quietly. "You don't need to worry right now." The boy didn't reply. He just looked out the window as the highway stretched ahead, his small face reflecting both exhaustion and confusion. As Reynolds drove, the baby finally drifted off to sleep. The boy sat still, holding her tiny blanket tightly in his lap. The officer glanced at them through the rearview mirror, his thoughts heavy. He couldn't stop thinking about how scared the boy must have been that morning, finding his mother unresponsive, trying to figure out what to do, and finally deciding to take the car and drive towards safety. The drive to the grandmother's house took almost an hour, and during that time, the officer kept thinking about how fragile and strong people could be at the same time. Sometimes life pushed even children into impossible situations. When they finally reached the small house at the edge of town, an elderly woman ran out to meet them, tears already in her eyes. The moment she saw the children, she covered her mouth and broke down. The boy rushed into her arms and the baby started crying again, as if she too recognized the familiar voice. Reynolds stood back, giving them a moment. The sound of their sobs filled the air, a mix of sadness and relief. He looked away, swallowing hard. That morning he had expected a normal patrol, maybe a few traffic stops or speeding tickets. Instead, he had stumbled upon a story that would stay with him for the rest of his life. A story about love, fear, and the unbreakable bond between siblings. And as he quietly got back into his car, watching the family cling to each other on the porch, he knew one thing for sure. Sometimes the smallest hands hold the greatest courage. The small house at the edge of town felt heavy with silence that afternoon. The grandmother, a frail woman with tired eyes, sat on the couch holding the baby close to her chest. Her hands trembled as she rocked the child gently. The little boy sat beside her, his legs swinging off the edge of the couch, his head resting against her arm. He hadn't spoken much since they arrived. Officer Reynolds stood near the doorway, hat in hand, unsure how to begin. He had been in difficult situations before, but this one felt different. The air in the room carried a quiet kind of sadness that words couldn't fix. A neighbor had come over after hearing the news. She had brought a casserole and a few bags of groceries. The grandmother thanked her softly, but her voice cracked each time she spoke. She looked as though her whole world had fallen apart in a single day. The officer cleared his throat gently. "Ma'am," he said, keeping his voice low, "the paramedics confirmed that your daughter passed away in her sleep. It seems to have been peaceful. I'm truly sorry for your loss." The old woman nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. She didn't cry right away. She just held the baby tighter, pressing her cheek to the child's soft hair. "I told her she was working too much," she whispered, almost to herself. She never listened. She was always so worried about taking care of the kids. Reynolds looked down at the floor. "She must have loved them very much," he said quietly. "She did," the woman said. "They were her whole life." The boy shifted on the couch, his small fingers twisting together. "I tried to wake her up," he said suddenly, his voice breaking the heavy silence. "I shook her, but she didn't move. I thought maybe she was tired, so I waited. But the baby kept crying, and I didn't know what to do." The grandmother's lips quivered. She wrapped her arm around him and pulled him close. "You did your best," she said softly. "You did what you thought was right." The officer's heart ached as he watched them. He knew grief could hit in waves, sometimes through tears, sometimes through silence. The boy had been so brave, yet now that the rush of fear was over, he looked small again, just a child who had seen too much. The baby began to fuss, and the grandmother handed her a small bottle that the officer had brought from the car. The little one latched on quickly, her cries softening to quiet sniffles. Reynolds took a deep breath and said gently, "There will be some paperwork to handle, but I'll take care of most of it for you. The department can help with arrangements and get you in touch with family services. You're not alone in this." The woman nodded again. "Thank you, officer," she said. "I appreciate your kindness." He stayed a little longer, making sure they had everything they needed. Before he left, the boy followed him to the door. He looked up, his eyes wide and uncertain. "Am I in trouble for driving?" he asked quietly. Reynolds knelt down so he was at the boy's level. "No, you're not in trouble," he said. "What you did was dangerous, but I know why you did it. You were scared, and you wanted to protect your sister. That's what good brothers do." The boy's eyes filled with tears. "I didn't mean to break the rules," he whispered. "I know," the officer said gently. "Sometimes life doesn't give us time to think about rules. You did what you thought was right, and you kept your sister safe. That's what matters most." The boy nodded slowly. For the first time, a faint hint of relief crossed his face. When the officer drove away, he couldn't shake the image of those two kids out of his mind, the boy's trembling hands on the steering wheel, the baby crying in the back seat. The quiet courage it must have taken to leave that house and start driving toward hope. That night, back at the station, Reynolds sat at his desk long after his shift had ended. His report was supposed to be routine, but he found himself staring at the blank form. He didn't want to just write another case number. He wanted to write about the boy's bravery, about the love that had driven him to do something so incredible. But reports didn't leave space for that kind of story. They were meant for facts, not feelings. He sighed and rubbed his temples. His partner, Officer Daniels, walked by and noticed the tired look on his face. "You all right?" he asked. Reynolds nodded slowly. "Just one of those days you don't forget," he said. Daniels raised an eyebrow. "That the one with the kids?" "Yeah," Reynolds said quietly. "I've seen a lot in this job, but that one hit different. A kid that age behind the wheel, trying to save his baby sister. Makes you think about what people are capable of when they're scared but full of love." Daniels shook his head. "World's got too many sad stories," he said softly. "At least those kids are safe now." Reynolds nodded. "Yeah, safe. but their world will never be the same. The next morning, he decided to stop by the house again. He brought a box of baby formula, some diapers, and a few stuffed animals from the station's donation closet. When he pulled into the driveway, he saw the boy sitting on the porch steps, staring at the ground. "Hey there," the officer said as he got out of his car. The boy looked up and managed a small smile. "Hi," he said quietly. "How's your sister doing?" "She's sleeping," the boy said. "Grandma says she's been crying a lot, but she's okay." Reynolds nodded, handing him one of the stuffed animals, a small brown bear with a red ribbon around its neck. "I thought she might like this." The boy took it carefully, a little surprised. "Thank you," he said. The officer sat down on the step beside him. "You holding up all right?" The boy shrugged. "I don't know. I keep thinking about Mom. I keep thinking maybe she'll wake up." Reynolds didn't know what to say for a moment. He looked at the yard, the flowers bending in the wind, the sound of birds in the distance. Finally, he said quietly, "It's okay to miss her. It's okay to be sad, but she'd be really proud of you, you know that? You took care of your sister when it mattered most." The boy's eyes glistened. "She always told me I was the man of the house when she went to work," he said softly. "I didn't think she meant for real." The officer's throat tightened. He placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "You've got a big heart," he said, "and your grandma's lucky to have you there." Inside, the grandmother was sitting by the window, watching them. Her face softened as she saw the boy talking again, even if just a little. She stood up slowly and joined them outside. "He hasn't said much since yesterday," she said quietly. "Thank you for coming by." "Of course," Reynolds said. "We just want to make sure you're all taken care of." The woman looked at the boy and then back at the officer. "He blames himself," she said softly. "He thinks if he had called someone sooner, maybe things would have been different." The officer shook his head gently. "He did everything a child could do," he said. "Most adults wouldn't have known what to do in that situation. You should be proud of him." The woman nodded, her eyes misty. "I am," she said. "I just wish he didn't have to grow up so fast." Reynolds stayed a little longer, helping the grandmother bring in groceries and checking that they had enough supplies. Before he left, the boy followed him to the gate again. "Are you coming back tomorrow?" the boy asked. The officer smiled. "Maybe," he said. "Would you like that?" The boy nodded quickly. "Yeah, you make Grandma smile. She doesn't do that much anymore." Reynolds chuckled softly. "Then I'll stop by again soon." As he drove away, the officer couldn't help but feel that this story wasn't just another case. It was something that had found a way into his heart, something he wanted to see through. He made a silent promise to himself that he'd check in on those kids whenever he could. They'd already lost too much. Back at the station, he started a small donation drive without telling anyone why at first. He simply said there was a family in need. Within a few days, boxes of diapers, baby clothes, and canned food filled the corner of the break room. When his colleagues asked who it was for, he finally told them the story. No one spoke for a while after he finished. Then one of the younger officers said quietly, "Let's make sure those kids have what they need for as long as it takes." Reynolds nodded, grateful. The story of that little boy and his baby sister had already touched more hearts than he could have imagined. That evening, as the sun began to set, the officer sat in his car parked near the same stretch of highway where he had first seen that blue sedan. The road looked peaceful now, but he remembered every detail of that morning. The flashing lights, the trembling hands on the steering wheel, the sound of a crying baby. He realized that sometimes the people we think need saving are the ones who teach us what real strength looks like. That boy had faced something no child should ever face, yet his first thought had been to protect his sister. It was love, pure and simple, the kind that didn't need words to explain. Reynolds sat there for a while longer before finally driving home. He felt tired but also strangely hopeful. The world could be cruel, but it could also surprise you with moments of courage and kindness that made everything worth it. That night, as he turned off the lights and sat in the quiet of his living room, one image stayed in his mind. The boy on the porch, clutching the stuffed bear, whispering that he thought his mom would wake up. Reynolds knew he couldn't change what had happened, but maybe, just maybe, he could help make sure those children had a better tomorrow. The days that followed were quiet, but heavy for the small family. The grandmother did her best to stay strong, though her face showed the weariness of both grief and responsibility. The house, once filled with laughter and warmth, now carried a constant stillness. Even the baby, who usually cried or babbled through the day, seemed quieter, as if she could sense that something important was missing. The little boy spent most of his time near the window, watching the street. He didn't say much, but the sadness in his eyes spoke louder than any words could. He hadn't gone back to school yet. The neighbors came by with food and kind words, but no one could fill the empty space that his mother had left behind. Officer Reynolds kept his promise. He stopped by the house every few days, sometimes in uniform, sometimes in plain clothes. He brought groceries, toys for the baby, and even helped fix a loose door hinge in the kitchen. Each visit brought a little more light into the house. The grandmother would smile faintly and say, "You don't have to keep coming," but her eyes always showed quiet gratitude when he did. One afternoon, when the officer arrived, he found the boy sitting on the front steps again, a small notebook in his lap. He was drawing something, his face serious and focused. "What are you working on?" the officer asked as he sat down beside him. The boy held up the notebook shyly. It was a simple drawing of a house, a car, and 3 stick figures, one tall, one small, and one holding a baby. "It's my family," he said softly. This was before. The officer felt a lump form in his throat. "That's a really good drawing," he said. "You've got talent," the boy shrugged. "I just don't want to forget what we looked like. Sometimes I close my eyes and I can't remember her face right away. It scares me." The officer paused for a moment. "You won't forget her," he said gently. "You might not see her face in your mind every day, but she'll always be in your heart. That's how love works, and it stays." The boy nodded, looking down at the page. "Grandma says the same thing," he murmured. "But it still feels like she's gone too far away." The officer wanted to say something comforting, but no words seemed strong enough. Instead, he stayed quiet, letting the boy speak when he wanted to. After a few minutes, the boy looked up again. "Do you think I did the right thing?" he asked suddenly. "What do you mean?" the officer replied. "When I drove that day," the boy said, "I didn't know what else to do. But sometimes I think maybe I made it worse. Maybe if I had called someone sooner, things would be different." Reynolds shook his head gently. "You did the best you could," he said. "You were scared, but you made a choice to protect your sister. That's something your mom would be proud of. You didn't make anything worse, son. You helped make sure both of you were safe." The boy looked down, quiet for a moment, then whispered, "I just miss her." "I know," the officer said softly, "and it's okay to miss her. It means you loved her a lot." Inside the house, the grandmother called them in for lunch. The smell of soup filled the air, warm and comforting. It reminded Reynolds of his own mother years ago, cooking in a small kitchen while the radio played softly in the background. They sat around the small table. The grandmother, the boy, the officer, and the baby sitting in her high chair. It wasn't a fancy meal, but it felt like something deeper, a moment of togetherness that all of them seemed to need. After they ate, the grandmother began talking quietly about her daughter. She told stories about her, how she used to work 2 jobs, how she never complained, and how much she loved her children. The boy listened carefully, his eyes focused on every word as if he was trying to memorize each memory. When the officer was about to leave, the grandmother stopped him at the door. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You've done more for us than anyone could ask for." Reynolds smiled gently. "You don't have to thank me," he said. "I'm just doing what feels right. Those kids remind me that there's still good in the world even when life seems unfair." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the corner of her sleeve. "You've given us hope again," she said softly. That evening, as Reynolds drove home, he thought about how life could change in a moment. One small choice, like turning on a siren for a swerving car, had led him into a story that had touched his soul. It wasn't just about duty anymore. It was about humanity, about connection. The next week, the story of the boy began to spread around town. A local newspaper wrote a short article about it, describing how a young child had driven miles to save his baby sister after their mother passed away. The headline read, Little hero saves baby sister in heartbreaking journey. People were moved. Some dropped off donations at the police station. Others mailed letters to the family. Toys, blankets, and handwritten notes filled the grandmother's small porch. For the first time since the tragedy, the house started to feel alive again. The boy didn't understand why people were sending gifts. "I didn't do anything special," he said to the officer one day. "I just drove," Reynolds smiled. "Maybe, but what you did came from love. And that's what people see. You reminded them what it means to care for someone more than yourself." The boy thought about that quietly, his fingers brushing against the small toy car someone had sent. As days turned into weeks, life slowly began to settle into a new rhythm. The grandmother found comfort in her daily routines, and the baby started laughing again, a sound that filled the rooms like sunlight. The boy began drawing more, covering pages with pictures of his family, his new home, and sometimes even a police car parked on the side of the road. One day, Reynolds brought him a small gift, a model police car, shiny and blue. "For you," he said, handing it to him. The boy's face lit up for the first time in a long while. "Wow," he said, running his fingers over it. "It looks real. It's yours," the officer said. "To remind you that brave people come in all sizes." The boy smiled shyly. "Do you think I could be a police officer one day?" Reynolds smiled back. "I don't just think you could. I think you'd make a great one." The boy looked down at the car again, his eyes glowing with quiet pride. For the first time since the accident, he felt a sense of purpose. Something new had taken root inside him. A dream. That night, when Reynolds returned home, he sat in his living room thinking about everything that had happened. He thought about how the boy had changed, from scared and broken to slowly healing. It reminded him that sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones with power or badges, but the ones who carry love through pain and keep moving forward. The next morning, as the officer got ready for work, he received a call from the grandmother. Her voice was calm but full of emotion. "I just wanted to say thank you again," she said. "You've been like family to us. He looks up to you. He says he wants to be just like you when he grows up." The officer smiled softly. "That means more than you know," he said. "Tell him I'll stop by later this week." Before hanging up, she added, "I think my daughter would have been so grateful to know someone like you was there for her kids." After the call, Reynolds sat quietly for a while, staring out the window. The morning light spilled across his kitchen table, and for the first time in a long while, he felt something peaceful settle inside him. A few days later, he did visit again. He found the boy outside helping his grandmother hang laundry on the line. The baby was sitting in a small playpen nearby, clapping her hands and laughing as the sheets fluttered in the wind. "You've got a good helper here," Reynolds said, smiling. The grandmother chuckled softly. "He's been keeping me on my toes," she said. "He even fixed the old radio yesterday," the boy grinned. "I just wanted Grandma to hear her songs again." Reynolds laughed softly. "You're quite the handyman." They all spent the afternoon together, talking and sharing stories. The air was lighter that day. There was still sadness, of course, but it no longer felt like the kind that suffocated. It was softer now, mixed with gratitude and healing. As the sun began to set, Reynolds stood by his car, ready to leave. The boy ran up to him and handed him a piece of paper. "I made this for you," he said shyly. The officer unfolded it carefully. It was another drawing, this time of a police car parked on a road beside a blue sedan. Next to it stood two figures, one tall, one small, and a baby in the back seat. Across the top, in messy handwriting, the boy had written, "Thank you for finding us." Reynolds felt his eyes sting as he looked at the drawing. He crouched down and put a hand on the boy's shoulder. "I didn't find you," he said softly. "You found me too." The boy smiled, not fully understanding but sensing the emotion behind the words. That night, as the officer drove away, the stars began to appear above the trees. The road stretched ahead, quiet and endless, but somehow it felt different now. Brighter, safer. He realized that sometimes, in the middle of duty, you stumble upon something that changes your heart forever. And somewhere behind him, in that small house at the edge of town, a boy looked up at the same sky, holding a toy police car in his hand, dreaming of a future where he could help others, just like the man who had once stopped him on the side of the road. The drive to the grandmother's house was quiet at first. The officer kept glancing at the rearview mirror where the boy sat, holding his baby sister close. Her tiny hands clutched his shirt as if afraid he might disappear. The boy's face looked pale, his eyes heavy and tired, but he didn't cry anymore. He just stared out the window, watching the trees rush by. Every now and then he'd whisper something to the baby, soft words the officer couldn't quite hear. The officer didn't want to pressure him, but his heart ached for the two kids sitting in the back seat. He knew what had happened at their home by now. The paramedics had confirmed that the mother had passed away peacefully. It was something that no child should ever have to see, and yet this boy had faced it alone. And after that, he had done something no adult would expect, and he had taken charge. He had tried to save his sister the only way he knew how. After a few miles, the officer gently said, "We'll be at your grandma's soon. She's waiting for you." The boy nodded but didn't say anything. His small hands rubbed the baby's back as she whimpered softly. The officer noticed the boy's knuckles were scratched, maybe from holding the steering wheel too tightly. He must have been terrified driving that car alone, yet he didn't stop. That kind of courage, born from love, was something few grown people could ever match. The car rolled into a quiet street lined with tall oak trees. At the end stood a small white house with a porch and flower pots hanging by the door. An elderly woman was standing outside, clutching a blanket, her eyes darting up and down the road. The moment she saw the patrol car, she dropped the blanket and ran toward it. The officer parked and quickly stepped out. The boy opened the door before the car even stopped moving completely. The grandmother reached them, tears already streaming down her face. She pulled the boy into her arms, crying out his name. Then she carefully took the baby, holding her so close it looked like she never wanted to let go. "Oh my God, thank you," she kept saying between sobs. "Thank you for bringing them to me." The officer stood a few steps back, his chest tight. He had seen many emotional scenes in his years of work, but this one hit differently. There was something pure about it, grief and relief mixing into one powerful moment. The grandmother turned to the officer. "They told me what happened," she said, her voice trembling. "My daughter," she was all they had. "And she looked down at the boy. "He tried to get here on his own? With the baby?" The officer nodded. "Yes, ma'am. He was driving when I pulled him over. He said he wanted to bring his sister to you." The woman's lips quivered. "Oh, my poor boy." She hugged him again, pressing her cheek to his head. "You did so well. You did so well." The boy finally broke down then. He buried his face in her shoulder and cried quietly. It wasn't loud or wild. It was the kind of cry that comes when the fear is finally over, when the weight of everything sinks in. The baby, sensing the emotion, started to whimper again, but the grandmother rocked her gently and whispered soothing words. After a while, the officer excused himself to make a few calls. The authorities needed confirmation that the children were safe, and arrangements had to be made for the days ahead. But even as he spoke on the phone, his eyes kept drifting back to the porch where the small family sat huddled together. By the time the sun began to set, the grandmother invited the officer inside. "You've done more for us than I can ever repay," she said softly. "Please come in for a moment." He stepped inside the small home. It smelled faintly of lavender and something baking, maybe the last thing she had made before she got the call. On the wall were photos of family gatherings, birthdays, and smiling faces. Among them was a picture of a young woman holding a baby, her eyes bright and full of life. The same baby now slept peacefully in her grandmother's arms. The officer looked at the photo and felt a lump form in his throat. "She looks like she was a wonderful mother," he said quietly. "She was," the grandmother replied. "She loved those kids more than anything. And that boy," she glanced toward the small living room where he sat wrapped in a blanket. "He has her heart, always trying to take care of others no matter how hard it is." The officer stayed for a while longer, helping fill out some paperwork and explaining what would happen next. When he finally stood to leave, the boy got up from the couch. He walked over shyly and handed the officer something small, a toy car, old and a bit broken on one side. "This was in Mom's car," the boy said softly. "I used to play with it when she drove. You can have it, for helping us." The officer didn't know what to say. He knelt down, taking the toy carefully like it was something precious. "Thank you," he said. "That means a lot." The boy gave a faint smile, the first real one the officer had seen all day. Driving back that night, the officer couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The road looked different now. Every turn, every shadow reminded him of that old blue sedan swerving between lanes, of the little hands gripping the steering wheel, and of the small, scared face trying so hard to be brave. At the station, his partner asked, "Rough day?" He nodded slowly. "You could say that, but also, maybe one of the most meaningful ones I've ever had." Over the next few days, news of the event began to spread. A local reporter heard the story and wrote about it in the newspaper. Soon, people from nearby towns started reaching out, offering help to the family. Some brought clothes and baby supplies. Others donated to cover funeral costs. The grandmother was overwhelmed by the kindness. The officer visited again later that week. The boy ran out to greet him, this time his face brighter. The baby was in a small playpen near the porch, giggling as she tried to grab her blanket. The grandmother looked tired but peaceful. "We've been getting letters," she said. "People we don't even know are writing, saying they're praying for us. It's like the whole world suddenly cares." The officer smiled. "That's because what your grandson did touched hearts. He showed everyone what love really looks like." The boy blushed a little and looked away, kicking at the porch step. "I just didn't want my sister to be alone," he said quietly. "And that," the officer said, "makes you braver than most people I know." For a moment, silence filled the air, a calm, warm silence that carried both sadness and gratitude. The grandmother wiped her eyes and said, "You're always welcome here, officer. You're part of our family now." As he drove off again, the officer thought about how sometimes life throws us into situations we never expect. Sometimes the smallest hands have to do the biggest things, and sometimes, even in the darkest moments, love becomes the light that leads us home. He kept the toy car on his desk at the station. It was small, faded, and missing one wheel, but it reminded him of something important, that even in a world full of chaos, there are still moments that restore faith in humanity. Every time he looked at it, he remembered the boy's steady hands on the wheel, the crying baby in the back seat, and the courage that came from the purest place of all, a brother's heart trying to protect his sister. And deep down, he knew he would never forget that day. Several weeks passed after that emotional day, and life slowly began to find a new rhythm for the little family. The grandmother's house, which had once felt too quiet, was now filled with small sounds again: a baby's laughter, the creak of a rocking chair, and sometimes the faint hum of the boy's voice when he talked softly to his sister. Every morning, the boy helped his grandmother with small chores. He fed the baby her breakfast, fetched diapers, and even learned to warm her milk the way his mother used to. The grandmother watched him carefully, noticing how quickly he had grown up. There was still a heaviness in his eyes, a kind of quiet sadness that no child should ever carry, but there was also a spark. The same spark she had seen in her daughter years ago. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, the officer stopped by again. He parked his car near the fence and walked up the familiar porch steps. The boy was sitting on the porch floor, playing with a set of toy cars spread out in front of him. When he saw the officer, his face lit up. "You came back," he said excitedly. "I told you I would," the officer replied with a smile. "How are you two doing?" "We're okay," the boy said. "Grandma makes pancakes every morning. And the baby's learning to crawl now. She laughs a lot." "That's good to hear," the officer said warmly. "You've been helping her, haven't you?" The boy nodded proudly. "I'm the big brother. I have to protect her. Mom always said that." The officer sat down on the porch steps beside him. For a moment, they both just watched the yard, the baby playing on a blanket, the grandmother tending to flowers, and the soft breeze carrying the smell of freshly cut grass. "You know," the officer said gently, "a lot of people heard about what you did. Your story spread all over the country. People are calling you a hero." The boy's eyes widened. "A hero, but I just drove. I didn't do anything special." The officer smiled. "You did something very special. You stayed calm when everything was falling apart. You took care of your sister when no one else could. That's what being a hero means. Doing something brave when you're scared." The boy looked down, his fingers tracing a small scratch on one of his toy cars. "I was really scared," he admitted quietly. "I didn't know if I could make it." The car was shaking and the baby kept crying. "I thought maybe I'd crash or something, but I just kept thinking of Grandma's house. I wanted to get there before dark." The officer nodded slowly. "And you did. You kept going because your heart wouldn't let you stop. That kind of courage, it comes from love. The grandmother joined them on the porch, wiping her hands on her apron. "I tell him that too," she said with a warm smile. "He's stronger than he realizes." The boy smiled shyly and leaned against her shoulder. The officer could see how close they had become, how they held on to each other like family should. A few days later, the town decided to honor the boy quietly, not with big speeches or news cameras, but with something simple and meaningful. The police department invited the grandmother and children to a small gathering. There were neighbors, a few officers, and local families who had followed the story. The chief of police spoke briefly, praising the boy's courage and compassion. Then, to everyone's surprise, the officer stepped forward with a small box. He opened it and handed the boy a shiny medal. It wasn't an official award, but something the officers had made themselves, a token of bravery. "We don't give out medals for love," the officer said softly. "But we should, because that's what guided you that day, but love. And love is what makes real heroes." The crowd clapped gently, and the boy stood there holding the medal with both hands. He didn't know what to say, so he just whispered, "Thank you." After the ceremony, the officer knelt beside him again. "How's school going?" he asked. "I'm going back next week," the boy replied. "Grandma says I should finish what Mom wanted me to do, learn and be kind." "She's right," the officer said. "Your mom would be very proud of you." The boy smiled faintly. "Sometimes I still dream about her," he said quietly. "In the dream, she's in the car driving. She keeps telling me it's going to be okay, and when I wake up, I kind of believe her." The officer felt a lump in his throat. "That's her way of staying with you," he said softly. "She'll always be there, in your heart, in your memories, and in the way you take care of your sister." The boy nodded, wiping his eyes quickly. "I think she'd be happy we made it to Grandma's," he said. That was all I wanted that day. Weeks turned into months, and life began to move forward. The baby grew quickly. She started crawling, then walking, her laughter echoing through the house. The boy went back to school and made new friends, though everyone in town already knew his story. Some kids would whisper about it in the hallways, but he didn't mind. He didn't like being called a hero. He just wanted to be normal again. The officer visited the family every now and then, sometimes bringing small gifts, a pack of crayons for the baby, a book about cars for the boy. But mostly he came just to check in, to make sure they were doing okay. One afternoon he found the boy sitting outside under the same oak tree where it had all begun. He was reading quietly, the baby playing with grass near his feet. "Hey, officer," the boy said with a grin. "Guess what? I got an A on my science test." "That's amazing," the officer said, smiling. "You're going to go far, kid." The boy looked thoughtful. "You know, I think I want to be a police officer when I grow up," he said. "Like you?" The officer raised an eyebrow, pleasantly surprised. "Oh yeah, why's that?" "Because you help people," the boy said. "And because you didn't just see a kid driving. You saw someone who needed help. You didn't yell at me or scare me. You helped me find my way home." The officer's heart swelled at the words. "That means more than you know," he said quietly. "If you ever decide to wear the badge one day, I'll be proud to see it." The boy grinned. "Then I'll try my best." The sun began to set again, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The grandmother came out with a small tray of lemonade and cookies, laughing when she saw the two of them sitting together like old friends. The baby toddled toward her, arms open wide, and the yard filled with the sound of her happy giggles. It was one of those simple, perfect evenings, the kind that stays in your heart forever. As the officer got ready to leave, he looked once more at the small house, the family that had endured so much yet stood strong. He thought about how life could change in a single moment, a wrong turn, a tragedy, a chance encounter, and how sometimes those moments lead to something beautiful. He climbed into his patrol car, started the engine, and drove down the same stretch of road where it had all begun. The toy car the boy had given him still sat on the dashboard. He reached out, touched it gently, and smiled. That night, as he parked the patrol car back at the station, he looked up at the stars and whispered a quiet thank you. Not just for the family being safe, but for being reminded of something powerful, that even in the hardest times, love and courage can light the darkest roads. And somewhere in that small house on the edge of town, a little boy looked out his window at the same stars, holding his baby sister close. He didn't know what the future would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. As long as he had his family and the memory of his mother's love, He would always find his way home.